Puddles and I welcome you to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. We are in beautiful Orlando, Florida, in the home of Robert Carpenter. Robert, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, Mike. Been too long.
I know, it's been a while.
And I'm Bob to you from, we went to college together. I got stories about that.
Oh my gosh. It was the 1980s, and we were in school together. Bob was a tuba performance major at Northwestern and an electrical engineering major at Northwestern.
That's right.
And you ended up working, not only you would play tuba at night here in Orlando and work on the space shuttle during the day, right?
I've been very, very fortunate. I've had two careers that went simultaneous, never stopped playing in the orchestra here, and yeah, I've worked for NASA for about 10 years, and after that went to work for the Army and as a consultant for doing electrical engineering and project management. So,
well, Bob, I will mention Bob from time to time to friends of mine because he is the only tuba playing rocket scientist that I know.
Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to play tuba. You don't have to be a tuba player to be a rocket scientist, but it doesn't hurt.
And you studied with Mr. Jacobs.
I did. That was a seminal part of my life, a wonderful time. Yeah, he was very influential in everything that I do now.
What do you suppose, what brought you to his studio? I mean, you came to Northwestern, but obviously you came to Northwestern to be with him, probably.
I went to Northwestern, as you said, to study with Arnold Jacobs and got an engineering degree on the side. So yeah, here in Orlando, where I grew up, the brass section of the Florida Symphony Orchestra was, a lot of them were from Chicago, including the tuba players, a very, very close friend, Russ Ward. And Russ Ward was my teacher as a kid.
Okay.
And so with the influence of Russ Ward and Chuck Gottschalk and Sue Whitney, a few folks that had recently, had spent a lot of time in Chicago, they said the only place for you to go, you need to go to Chicago, you need to meet Arnold Jacobs, you need to study with him, and that's what you got to do. And so that's what I did. I had Arnold Jacobs' phone number because Russ gave it to me, and he said, call him up on a Sunday afternoon, see if you can't get a lesson. So I called him up, cold called him on a Sunday afternoon in 1980, whatever, 1, 2, 3, somewhere in that. And he answered the phone. I said who I was and that I'd like to have a lesson, and he said, sure, come on up. And I went up, and my dad flew me up, and we went to the Fine Arts Building, and I went and had a lesson with him, and life's never been the same since.
You remember anything about that first lesson?
I do. You know how real important times in your life get etched.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so, yeah, I remember, I remember Arnold Jacobs opening the door and looking at me, and he sized up my father. And for how tall he was.
Oh, how tall is your dad?
Yeah, he was about 5'9".
Okay.
So he said to me as we, and then he had my father sit out on the bench outside where he sat next to Peter Warhoftig, I believe.
Oh, you had a lesson. Okay.
Yeah, same
Peter.
Yeah, wow. Peter was next, I think. So he was sitting talking to my dad, and so my dad. It was very fascinating for him too, realizing he was getting into this tuba cult, he used to call it.
Tuba cult.
So yeah, Mr. Jacobs was like, as a lot of students know, it was like plugging into a supercomputer when you would walk into his studio. And the first time you walk in, and there's all this amazing equipment, the spirometer and the funnels and the things and
the oscilloscope.
The oscilloscope. Yeah, it's kind of like my house. And he would do subliminal messages while you're playing. I remember even in that first lesson he had me play. I was putting together the Vaughan Williams in high school to play with youth orchestra, and actually with Florida Symphony. I'd won a concerto competition, and I was struggling with the high notes and all the stuff that a kid would struggle with.
Right.
And I had no problem playing it when I was in there, because I played it and it didn't work, and he made a couple of little comments about air, about, and I could suddenly do things that I couldn't do otherwise. And it's not like my focus was better. It's not. He had me just physically doing things. It was like moving my hand around or something, which he used to do also.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's immediate. He was immediately using these tools that he used throughout, the next 5 years that I got to work with him from day one. So, you walk out of that with your head just scrambled, saying, this is where I need to be. It was an instant friendship, instant, clicking.
Yeah. Do you remember anything? You mentioned just with your air. Do you remember with any specifics what he had you doing with your air? It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, but yes, he talked more with me about music and making music than about physical activities. He always tried to keep those things separate.
Yeah.
But even in this first lesson, he would, do the thing where you, take your hand and he said, blow on your hand, and to this day, I that's an instant tool I use with students of all ages when they're struggling. You don't have the fuel, the note's not going to come out, and he did it right then. And
so he would have you do the sibilant S,
yeah,
and then the
yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly. And that's he said if you don't have wind on your hand, then the song can't come out.
Yeah.
So right from the start.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, and so then you ended up coming to Northwestern, and what kind of changes do you remember him being able to affect as during the course of your study with him at school?
The changes for me that he affected?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. There were multiple changes on different levels. And you start talking on the physical tuba playing level about how to play, and there's that. But it goes all the way up to the top level, which affects everything. It affects my work at NASA. It affects my work that I do now in project management, how I lead. He really taught about vision. He taught about imagination and vision and knowing where it is you're trying to go, and everything. I started figuring out everything he said. There were metaphors all over the place. There's metaphors in your playing that apply to life, and so he talked a lot about imagination, about a musical imagination, and knowing what it is you're trying. The storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
He was very much into storytelling. So, we never talked about learning how to be a great tuba player. We talked about learning to be a great musician. So
that's great.
Yeah. So, as I get into the effects that he had on my life, there were obviously in how to physically play the instrument and how to be a musician, how to turn a phrase into something that's interesting that somebody's going to want to listen to, and all the sub-phrasing that we used to talk about, where one note or two notes might be a phrase, a sub-phrase, and then you add them together like you would add words together into a sentence so that your phrase can have some meaning and impact on the listener. So, we talked a lot about that, and obviously we talked about wind and air, and so
that sounds good.
Sure.
Bob, you mentioned the what I presume is note grouping.
Mm-hmm.
Connecting notes to make a better phrase, like as in putting words together in sentences that make sense, and then paragraphs and etc. Tell me about that.
Okay, sure. Now, what led to this conversation goes back to him sizing up my father's height, because he determined very quickly that I was not going to be a huge guy, and measured my lung capacity. Said, "Oh, that's interesting. It's terrible. It's just like me. I have subclinical asthma and small lungs, so my air capacity was similar to him, which he thought was interesting, but not necessarily good for me. But so he taught me some things. We talked about this. He says, you need to know some tricks. You need to know some phrasing thoughts. We need to teach you music in a way that you can survive as a tuba player with small lungs.
Hmm.
So I breathe a lot, and I break up phrases just like he breathes a lot and breaks up phrases, and so he taught me about phrasing, and that's how we wound up getting into the sub-phrasing and then the notes. So we would dig into a piece, whether it's in the Patag book or an excerpt, and look at what notes are really important. Where is it going? How does this phrase really work?
Mm-hmm.
And so to get specific, I guess, if you're thinking of the ride, the first two notes are a phrase, sub-phrase, bomb, bomb.
Mm-hmm.
The next two are two, ba-bom, bomb, bomb, ba-bom, because the same thing going on. Bomb, 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 ba-bom, bomb, bomb, and so on.
Yeah.
So, and the same, the Meister Singer is another good one. The first note is a phrase, bomb, 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 bomb. So phrase, 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 two-note phrase, bomb, 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 bomb. So you see where these things are all sub-phrases. Well, every time you have one of those, it's an opportunity to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you can, doesn't mean you should, but those are where you identify the places where, if you're a small lung guy like me, you can cheat. And so basically, if you take a phrase, they can all come apart, and the notes are interrelated. Sometimes they're pickup note. One's a dominant to tonic kind of relationship, or something like that. And you'll find great places to. I look at it as great places to breathe, but it's also great ways to just string the notes together so that they make sense, and
Right.
it makes a great phrase.
I know that Dave Federle, in his interview, he talks about this at something like that also. But you're the only other person that really has brought this up. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting to get more information, and also the reason why he brought it up with you.
Right. That's why I thought that might be interesting, just for historical reasons, because a lot of my friends don't have this problem. I don't know what your capacity is, but
It's a lot less than it was when I was when we were in college.
That's another subject we'll get into later. But yeah, exactly. So, but I remember Pat Sheridan and Andy Hagerman and God, I remember those. I remember Andy had these huge lungs, six,
He's a big guy.
6.5 liter, capacity, and the same with Pat and some other folks. And here I am with my 4 liters of air on a good day, maybe 4.5 when I moved back to Florida. Up in Chicago, whether it's the cold air or what, I had a little bit of asthma on top of it.
Yeah.
And so, I remember him. Remember, Mr. Jacobs had me. He said, "Here, come on over here." And he handed me this tube that connected to the big box.
Mm-hmm.
Said, "Why don't you wheeze into this?" So okay, and he printed out the card, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he looked at it, and he had his, and it was like, see how that kind of tails off there? You're really having a struggle to move the air out. He had me go get albuterol and all this stuff too.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but that was the impetus to being really cognizant of where to hit the gas in a phrase,
Mm-hmm.
where to how to spin it and make it sound musical and powerful and all of that, even if at times you're cheating because you don't have enough air to play Prokofie's fifth, which is now, you turn weaknesses into strengths. That was another thing we talked about, and that's now a strength. I mean, I can play long phrases without any problem, and Prokofie's fifth's a great example. Is all these beautiful long phrases, so you can breathe all over the place if you are quick and efficient and get your way through. So.
Now, did you you started studying with him 81 and 82, and then when was your last? Do you think your last lesson with him?
Yeah, I actually formally started with him in 83.
83, okay.
Mm-hmm. The lessons before that were just going up to get ready for college, and so I started in '83 and left in '88.
Okay, so about 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
What other things? So phrasing, getting you to move more air, life lessons, metaphoric life lessons. Anything else that?
Well, sure. I mean, the metaphoric one. This is a great one. It says every note you play, let that teach your next note. It says every note should get better. You don't stay the same. Nothing ever stays the same. It's impossible it's very difficult for things to stay the same. But he says, so when you play a note, make it a pearl, and then make the next one learn from the last one, so that they just keep getting better. And talk about a life lesson. I mean, boy, that's true for everything. So he was influential in looking for excellence, no matter what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I remember him saying, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. You're not just staying the same. Treading water is not possible in the music business.
That's right. And then he started, you go from there to start talking about aging. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any idea what he's talking about when he talked about the aging effects.
Yeah.
I was never going to age. You
exactly.
kidding? Yeah, still not. I'm still 25 years old. Right? Uh-huh. Yeah, except that it's like, wow, I have to warm up now, and really didn't have to at all before, but I got to make sure the tissues are all doing what I want them to do before I go play a Nielsen concert.
Yeah.
He gave warning, and I think there's something to take away from that as well. Is we learn from him at a time in our lives, and we were able to do certain things at that time. And now I can't do things the same way that I used to. I have to do things different. So, there's actually a way I strayed from. I have strayed from some of his teachings, mm-hmm. particularly related to free buzzing, but which I'll talk about. Not a lot, just a little bit. And you have to adapt. You have to figure out what it is that allow you to adapt and use that education that he gave you to go.
Right.
I think about it. This guy is a super genius. He knew all the physiological effects. He would keep up with medicine. He diagnosed his own problems when he was getting older and having problems. And mm-hmm. I remember some particular interesting lessons at that point. But he was always adapting, always learning. When are you going to retire? When I stop learning things about playing the tuba. So if he's still doing it, we kind of have to also. So it's fascinating from that perspective.
It is. Bob, you're an engineer. I'm wondering, with your talk of with Mr. Jacobs, him talking about breathing and stuff with you. Did you ever get into the whole respiratory curve? Did he talk about that with you?
Absolutely.
Because you could probably understand it, unlike myself.
Yeah, right. No, we talked a lot about it. I mean, we talked about hysteresis curves. He was a scientist kind of guy too, so we talked a lot about science. But as far as air goes, the S curve is one I still carry and I teach. I use this with high school students and whomever. But yeah, we talked about the S curve, where your vital capacity from 0 to 100% full of your lungs. You basically have this curve, and it's curved at the ends and linear in the middle. And the curves represent kind of where it's difficult to inhale anymore or exhale anymore. If you're empty, it's hard to get that air back in. If you're empty, it's hard to get that air out. So you have to live within, and that's like the last 10% of your lung capacity, and this is the top 10%. If you're full, you can't get any more in. So you're going to live with only about 80% of that amount. And while you're playing, you need to focus and concentrate on making sure that you're doing that. So we talked about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And being efficient and knowing where those points are within yourself. You need to know when you're full, know when you're empty, and don't go past that, because you're gonna struggle.
That seems like it's in my own teaching, when I get incoming freshmen or I'm teaching high school students, it's this unnecessary tension states that are brought on by going below that 20%.
Oh yeah, you can panic because now you're done. You're out of air.
Yeah,
You're
just
screwed.
pushing the air out
Yeah.
instead of blowing the air out.
Right. Again, if you live in that linear region, life's a lot easier, and you can inhale fast and you can exhale fast. So we talked a bit about that. You know what's interesting though? You know, we had all that whole room full of machinery. We never really messed with it too much. I think he was done with that by the time I was studying with him. We really talked mostly about music and being a great artist, but at the same time, we did talk a lot about the vital capacities and how your lungs work and the physiology part and the seventh cranial nerve part about making your brain talk to your lips. So yeah, it was interesting. It's good times.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Bob, you mentioned free buzzing, which might have been antithetical to what Mr. Jacobs was teaching, and just did he have you just buzzing, mouthpiece buzzing, rim buzzing, singing, all that stuff?
All of the above except for free buzzing, and mostly mouthpiece buzzing and singing, and he was very much into singing. Talk about free buzzing first, and
Sure.
I'll tell you the other stuff. So free buzzing, he used to tell me that he thought it was not necessarily going to destroy you, but that if you did it wrong, it could get in trouble, so he just advises not to do it.
Yeah, I remember him saying that.
Right. So it's not like I felt like I was really breaking any rule. He was going to come out of heaven and hit me in the head. My dear friend Mike Royland's free buzzes, and I've known him for a very, very long time, and he and I were talking about aging and preparation for keeping your face put together, and some of the tricks he does in order to survive a very, very rigorous life that he does. And he's about the same age as me, and so he taught me a couple of little things. I don't free buzz for more than 30 seconds a day, but it's involved in my warm up, and it's always low, and it's not real low, but it's just gets going, and then I go to the mouthpiece and I buzz on the mouthpiece, and life is the same as it's always been, and then to the tuba and play all over. So, but yeah, that's the one thing that I do now that he would not encourage me to do back then, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
He was again, with me, once he taught me how to breathe in a way that was very efficient. I had to be efficient, and so it didn't take very long. I can't play anything unless I'm efficient, so that was not actually that.
You have to be efficient,
right?
Because of your capacity.
Because of my capacity. So most of our lessons were talking about singing, and you want to sound like a great singer, sound like Bud Herseth, play music, play in a way that you would want to hear. And of course, my wife was a singer, and she used to stop and buy the blueberry muffins and the coffee on the way into the lesson, and save me that time. It was wonderful. She's my girlfriend at the time, my wife 30 years later. So a very patient woman with the tubas all around. Anyway, so he knew her, and Arnold Jacobs knew Julia, and said, "Why don't you play this song? She's out in the hall. Play this for her." Again, always wanting to have a vision and a purpose for what it is you're playing. It's like, oh wow. And then he encouraged me to go to her solo classes, or classes where they would sing. So I started going to the singers' classes at Northwestern and listen to how they spun together their phrases and played solos and all that. And so there was an interesting perspective he threw at me that way. Not trying to teach me to be a great tuba player, teach me to be a great musician.
Mm-hmm.
Plays the tuba.
Do you remember? Was there any aha moments that you recall from that we haven't possibly discussed?
Oh, sure. The aha moment. One of them was trying to figure out what you're really supposed to sound like when you're playing, and I'd play, and he'd say, "No, it's not clear. That's not what you're trying to do," and it's fuzzy, and I was like, "Oh, it sounds good to me." And finally, he took the horn one day and said, "No, like this," and it sounded gritty and ugly, and it's like at the time, gritty sounds like,
mm-hmm.
Wow. So you do that. We were finally, playing, and I got it, and he whacked me on the knees. That's it. Do that again. You hear that? Do you hear what you just did? there were definite aha moments.
Yeah.
He says that's when you figure out you got your oral cavity where it's supposed to be, and the air flowing the way it's supposed to, get the lips vibrating the right way, and really get the instrument to resonate. He is what an incredible talent to be able to get somebody to do that and then recognize what they did to make that happen and turn it into a habit.
Yeah.
You know, and then the habits. We could talk all day. You know, that's what you're doing. You're creating habits. You don't ever get rid of a bad old habit. You just overlay it, replace it with a new habit.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first time you played for me in a lesson, I had to recalibrate what I thought beautiful was.
Right.
And because it was not a beautiful sound initially in my thoughts, but it was an amazing sound.
Oh, yeah.
And then what I describe to my students as stage makeup, and how theatrical people, you know, when you see them up close and they're in makeup, they really look hideous. But when you see them from the audience, they look normal.
Mm-hmm.
They look perfectly normal. But if they didn't have the makeup on, they'd be all washed out, and so their features would not carry to the back of the hall. Same thing with our sounds.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons he was so successful, I think, with his sound. Was up close, it was just full of junk.
Oh yeah, but by the time you're in the hall, all those overtones are just floating around, and all tons of sound, beautiful sound. It goes back to the micro phrasing as well. You know, where does the emphasis of the note happen? You know, the front end here, or whatever the purpose is. Up close, it may not make total sense, but by the time it's out there, it's amazing.
It is. It really is. Was something, and I think the best. You know, he's gone now. He's been gone for 17 years now. If you want to get a sense of that, the best recording, I think, is that Alexander Nevsky recording. Because for whatever reason, the engineers left the chorus mic that was next to Jacobs open.
That's great.
And so you hear all that stuff.
You hear every little piece of sound.
Yeah.
That is the best recording. I love that.
Just to get a sense of that sound. Of course, there's the
Nielsen's fourth is what I've been listening to lately.
Now, we've got Puddles is on this really nice tuba. I played this 5/4 cancel tuba, and it's really good.
I'm glad
and
you like it.
You're in charge of that.
I
sort of
am. Well, yeah, I got to play a major role in development of this.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
That's a very nice instrument.
Cool. I'm so glad that you like it. I love this horn. I play it a lot, all the time, practically, in the orchestra. This kind of grew out of Arnold Jacobs and his sound that he could make with that York. I don't think I could play a Holton or some of my old horns and make that work. So a friend of mine in town, Tom Treese, and I got into some science. I do a lot of science work, and we found out what the metals were and did some literature searches and met up with Zig Canstall, Zig Canstall worked for F.A. Reynolds, who worked for Pops Johnson in the York factory, and Zig still had notes of his own that explained how to spin a bell.
Yeah.
And how to make a York, basically. So we combined the metal with Zig's knowledge, and he's built some bells and built some instruments that do what they ought to do. They resonate like crazy. So this is one. I'm very proud of that horn.
That's great.
I'm so glad you like it.
Yeah, I have walked into the house and Bob invited me to play it, and it's really quite a fine instrument.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, Puddles, he says that the instrument's number one, but he actually thinks you're number one too.
Oh.
And he'd like to have me present you with this token of our thanks for letting us come in to your house. Genuine Tuba People TV water bottle.
Wow, that is so awesome.
I don't think it's manufactured quite to the stress tolerances of your tuba.
It's not so bad.
Okay, all right. Bob, it's so good to see you.
Oh, Mike, what a pleasure, and thank you for coming over.
Oh,
and
yeah.
talking. I didn't even tell all the stories about how helpful you were to me in college and
Oh.
stuff too. You've been a good friend.
Pshaw.
That's true. Thank you.
And now back to you.